Hello, my name is Ivan and welcome to the next part of the workshop videos. In this part we are going to talk about creating weapon and armor designs from scratch. So, we have now, if you're following along after the previous from scratch video, we now have the basic knowledge, how to use the different tools, how to use the different primitives, what to do, what not to do. So let's try to make something cooler than just a menu. Let's make a weapon first. Always the first thing is to kind of think about what you actually want to create. Do you want to do a sword, a mace, maybe a staff, or maybe something smaller like a knife, or make something bigger like a spear? And this is very important because you need to know how big the weapon is. And another thing to know is what are your size restrictions. Let's think about that you want to make weapons for an inventory in an RPG, or you want to have a weapons displayed on a weapon shop. Maybe you don't want all the weapons to be a different size because that would look maybe a bit weird. So the best thing is to choose a size and stick to it. So in my case, I will be doing a 64 by 64 pixels because that's kind of a normal thing. It gives us enough pixels to work with and make something interesting. Then we need when we choose also what kind of weapon we do, we need to figure out if the weapon is going to be, how the weapon is going to be positioned. Is it going to be tilted? Is it going to be side to one side to the other? We need to choose also the material of the weapon. Is it going to be wooden? Is it going to be metal and rock? And once we choose that, you can go back to, again, the assets that we've given, where we have from the previous from scratch, we have the different materials. You can use those for inspiration, what kind of material you want the weapon to be. We choose the color, and then you just make the different parts. Maybe it's a sword, maybe it has a hilt, maybe it has a blade. We shade it in the end, make it quite pretty. For ideas of weapons, you can open the weapon tileset. So if we go here, we have, of course, the weapons from scratch, and you have for inspiration here, we have some weapons examples. You're more than welcome to take these as inspiration and modify them and change them and make them your own. The same is going to be for the armor. And again, as we talked about, how big you need to think how big is the weapon, because you need to fit it in some way, diagonally, horizontally, vertically. And let's, for the sake of inclusiveness and make it so everybody can follow along, we're going to make something simple, like a plain sword. It's simple because it's very symmetrical. It's going to teach us how to look for symmetry and how to actually change symmetry to make it something more interesting. It's also straight, and it only has two parts normally, a blade and a hilt. So we don't have a lot of things to worry about. To follow along, please go to the weapon from scratch. You have all the steps here, and you can go from whichever step suits you in your perceived skill level. You can start by the very basic thing that we have, like just the outline. So then you can build it and shape the sword as much as you want to change it. Or you can choose the second one, which gives you at least some color inspiration. Then the hilt is going to be maybe wooden, and then the whole blade and everything else is going to be metal. Then, of course, the next step we're going to do, and you can choose the third image here, is to try to do a bit of shading. because we chosen the blade to be metal, we would like to have some shine to it, as you can see here. The hilt needs to be maybe a bit, to look a bit more rounded. And of course, to blend the colors, so we can put some darker areas, some brighter areas, and so on. Finally, you can just choose the final one and go wild. Make it a flame sword, make it a water sword, make it whatever you want. Again, for inspiration, we have some of these ones. Try it, test it out, whatever works best for you. Yes, so having said this, let's give it a shot. I will be going with this one. So again, and the weapons from scratch, this is number 1, sword outline. Yes. So let's, so as you can see, we decided to go with something that's absolutely symmetrical. And let's start off by just keeping it as symmetrical. The sword also is to the side because we wanted to kind of resemble something that you would see in, let's say, Diablo. So then again, as from the previous time, we decide to choose something grayish, maybe, or why not go more interesting? Let's do something that let's make a wooden sword. Something that's going to be mostly for training in a game. So maybe it's going to be the first sword that you get. For now, that looks a bit weird. I absolutely understand. And because if we just make the whole sword one color, that would be quite boring. Let's just do this. Okay, this starts to resemble something, but we still are missing a lot of stuff. Also, a wooden sword, I would say, would not have such fancy hilt grips. I think a squire or something like that would not have the privilege to have something so fancy. And also, let's do something more interesting. Let's also go for a look that does not have an outline, just so we can see another style that you can use, because in the last video we decided to go with kind of a completely outline style, and you would see the overall difference. So one thing that we straight away see, that without an outline we start to miss a lot of the more interesting detail. This looks very, very basic. I would actually think that it's a bit too basic, but let's make it a bit more interesting. Okay, this makes it even more uninteresting. Let's just, yeah, this is already more interesting. Let's make the hilt have a bit of side grip, like this. Oh, maybe we're just gonna put it like, I think this is better. I think this is much better. Maybe do it something like this. No. And then it's just a matter of experimenting, whatever suits you and you feel that it's your style. I think this is, yeah, this one speaks to me the most. And then I would also make it like this. And then let's make it the whole thing a bit lopsided, because maybe the sword has been used for a long time, so, and it's wood, so it might be a bit chipped here and there. So let's do something like this. And maybe we are missing a lot of stuff here. Maybe that was a bit too much. Oh, that was a bit too much. And then we do something like this for a starter. Now this looks weird. I like it. So now we have a very dark hilt. I would say that this is maybe a bit too dark for my taste. I would just brighten it up a bit. So we can use this darker color here. Oops. This darker color to give us some detail. Let's start by just adding some detail here. And let's say that the sun is hitting us from this direction. So this is going to be our sunny side, and this is going to be our less sunny side. And let's make it so some of the things are so chipped that it becomes like almost like little grooves. So we have stuff like this that's self-occlusion would give us to give a blade a bit of more interesting flavor, something like this. And because it's wood, and if we want to a very fast look at how we made the planks here, you see that it's nice to have little specks of especially on old wood that has little holes, and you also have the wood grains. So let's try to make those. Let's make a little hole here. You can see it starts to come little chip here. Maybe I'll put a little one here, something like this. Maybe this part here. And then, because we don't have a lot to work with now, it's a very small weapon, I would say that if we go too crazy, I think it would be a bit too much. But let's put some light on this one, just to visualize that we have a lit side, something like this. I think that's quite nice. Something like this, maybe here. Yes, that looks quite good. And maybe just to push the whole thing in the back. Maybe that's a bit too much. Yeah, maybe that's a bit too much. Let's just remove this one. And yeah, I think that's good. And then let's do something about the hilt. That looks a bit too boring. Maybe maybe the hilt wants to be a bit more something like this, something grayish, dark, something like this that shows that the hilt has been put in with has some road has been put on the hilt, something like this. Bottom, just like this, the rope, and then here. But maybe on this side we have, now on this side I would say that we have a bit of dark, just to make it pop a bit more. This one, let's make it a bit brighter, because we already know where the sun comes from. So why not let the sun shine in, as the song went, as far as I remember. Yes, that looks quite nice. Maybe just again do the same thing, but a little darker here. Something like this. You can kind of see. Maybe just put here. Yes. You can kind of zoom in and out, and also zoom in just to see that this sword is really destroyed. And I actually got a very interesting idea. Let's go all in on this idea that the sword is old and decrepit, and just follow also the previous one and just put some of these. So this sword, we found it somewhere in the jungle. Like this, maybe. And then you have some moss growing on it, like this. And the moss has started to engulf the hole, like this. And then you start to see that as we're building it, it gets more and more interesting. So let me just make it a bit bigger here. Maybe that was a bit too much. I think this one is good. A bit thicker here. And then a bit thicker here. Oh, okay, that was not pretty. Something like this. Now I'm just playing around, and at this point I think we can say that it's as good as we can get it. But as you can see, it's a very, we started with something very simple, and then just playing around with a number of colors, we could build something much, much more interesting. And of course, you can decide to make even more stuff, like put using a line tool, we can put a nice little streak in the middle, but at this point we're just introducing a bit too much noise. So yes,